to base. We found movement under the snow. Wait.
Welcome to Frost Hollow.
The blizzard began before dawn, swallowing Frost Hollow whole beneath a sky the color of iron. By sunrise there was no sound, but the hiss of snow against shuttered windows, no light but the pale shimmer of the drifts that had buried the road signs and telephone poles like the bones of some forgotten creature, and the villagers moved through it like ghosts wrapped in furs, eyes down, breath silver. Sheriff Marcus Hale had lived in this northern edge of Alaska his entire life and had never seen the wind behave like this, circular, restless whispering as if it carried language inside it, while his wife Lucy brewed coffee in their small cabin and kept glancing toward the door as though someone waited outside. The radio on the shelf sputtered with fragments of emergency reports. Avalanches. Missing hunters. A supply truck overturned 20 miles south, but between the static, another sound leaked through. A soft, sibilant murmur repeating what might have been names. Marcus pretended not to hear it. He cleaned his rifle, checked the firewood, told Lucy the storm would pass by nightfall, though in truth he could feel the mountain pressing closer around them. At noon the snow turned crystalline, reflecting light so fiercely that when he stepped out to check on the generator, he felt half blind, the air glittering with shards. Beneath his boots came a hollow echo, as though the ground were not solid ice but a thin crust hiding empty space. He stamped again and heard it tremble. When he crouched to look closer, he thought he saw movement, a shadow shifting just under the frozen surface, like a hand brushing from below, but when he blinked, only ice remained. He told himself fatigue made him imagine things. By evening, 3 neighbors failed to report on the emergency line. The village mayor, an old man named Griggs, trudged through shoulder-deep snow to the cabin, his beard glazed with frost, saying that Eli Turner's sled dogs had come home alone, ropes cut clean through, and the tracks ended at the edge of the lake. Marcus promised to organize a search at first light, but the words felt hollow because he knew first light might never come if the storm kept feeding on itself the way it did. That night, while Lucy dozed by the fire, he wrote a note in his logbook. Barometer falling. Wind speaks again. The phrase embarrassed him. He scratched it out, closed the book, and reached for the lantern. Then came the whisper. A breath so close it stirred the hair at his temple. A single word, Marcus. He spun, gun raised, light trembling over stacked firewood and frost-rimmed panes. Yet no one stood there. Outside the snow moaned, a low sustained hum like a choir buried beneath miles of ice. Lucy woke, frightened, asking what he'd heard. He lied and said nothing, but when he returned to bed, he found snowflakes scattered across the quilt, slowly melting, as if someone had stood there only moments ago. The next morning the wind eased and visibility returned enough for Marcus and 2 volunteers to reach the lake. They followed Eli's trail half a mile before it simply ceased. The snow around the end of the tracks was disturbed, churned into a perfect circle, and at the center lay a hole no larger than a dinner plate, descending straight down into darkness. One of the men lowered a flare. It fell perhaps 20 feet before vanishing in a rush of vapor, extinguished by something unseen. The smell that rose up was not earth or ice, but something sweet and rotten. They returned in silence. That evening, Lucy insisted they leave for Anchorage once the roads reopened. Marcus said yes, though he knew the roads were gone. The storm came again at dusk, heavier, meaner, a solid wall of white. In the flicker of the lantern, Lucy thought she saw shapes moving inside the flurry, tall, narrow figures that bent and straightened like reeds, but whenever she blinked they dissolved. The whispers grew bolder, calling entire sentences now. Always kind, always familiar, promising warmth. At midnight she heard her mother's voice outside the window. Her mother had been dead 5 years. When Marcus awoke to find the door unlatched and snow drifting into the room, Lucy stood barefoot on the porch, staring into the storm with tears frozen on her cheeks. He pulled her inside. She fought him, screaming that her mother was lost and needed help, that she could hear her calling from beneath the lake. He locked the door, burned extra wood, held her until the tremors stopped. By morning she would not speak. The mayor came again, bringing worse news. 2 more villagers gone, their houses filled with snow, though every window remained shut. In the drifts outside, Marcus saw faint impressions, not of footprints but of hands dragging. Through the powder, fingers long and spread wide. He tried to contact the nearest ranger station. The radio emitted nothing but whispering static that rose and fell in the rhythm of breathing. That night, Marcus dreamed of the lake, of dozens of faces frozen just below the surface, eyes open, mouths moving soundlessly. When he woke, the fire had died and the room was lit by a bluish glow that came from nowhere. Lucy sat by the window, whispering back to something unseen outside. He heard only his name repeated again and again. He called to her, but she didn't turn. Then, as the first beam of dawn tried to pierce the storm, she opened the door and stepped out. By the time Marcus reached the porch, she was already half buried, snow swirling around her like white fire. He lunged forward, caught her hand. It was warm, impossibly warm, and for a heartbeat he felt a pull downward, as though gravity itself had reversed. Her face looked peaceful, almost smiling, before the snow folded over her completely, leaving no trace. Marcus dug for hours, screaming her name until his voice broke, but the ground was solid beneath his shovel. No void, no body. At sunset, exhausted, he returned to the cabin alone. The radio crackled once more, and through the static he heard Lucy's voice. "Marcus, it's warm down here." Then the signal died. He sat all night staring at the doorway, the same doorway that now seemed to breathe, the hinges expanding and contracting with each gust of wind, as though the house itself listened. When morning came, Frost Hollow was silent again. No villagers outside, no smoke from any chimney. Only miles of perfect untouched snow shining under a sun that gave no heat. Marcus walked through the center of town, calling names, hearing them echo faintly back, until he reached the frozen fountain. There, beneath a thin sheet of ice, something moved. It looked like a hand pressing upward, pale as glass. He fell to his knees, scraping at the ice until his knuckles bled, and saw Lucy's face below, lips moving soundlessly. The whisper that rose through. The crack was not hers alone, but many voices interwoven. "Come down. It's warm. We're waiting." The ice broke. Cold mist burst upward like breath. Marcus staggered back, but the snow at his feet collapsed, revealing the same narrow hole he'd seen at the lake. From its depths poured a low humming, rhythmic, alive. He dropped his flashlight, watched its beam spin and vanish, then leaned closer, and the whisper changed tone, becoming a command that felt like memory itself speaking. "Return." He almost obeyed. At the last moment, a gunshot cracked through the storm, his own reflexive, firing into the hole, yet when the echo faded, the whisper remained, amused. He fled back to the cabin, barricaded the door, but the walls creaked as if fingers pressed from outside, tracing shapes in frost. He tried the radio again, shouting for help, but only received the same calm voice, his own, repeating the words he had just spoken. He realized then that Frost Hollow had become a circle, a loop in the storm, a place folded into itself where sound traveled but people did not. He lit every lamp, wrote one final note in his logbook: "If anyone finds this, do not listen to the snow," and waited for daylight that never came. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, the whispering began anew, faint at first, then louder, dozens of voices blending into one endless plea. Marcus pressed his palms against his ears, whispered back a prayer, and still he could hear them breathing through the wood, promising, begging, loving. Outside, the wind rose to a scream. Then abruptly, silence. The door swung open, though no hand touched it, revealing the white horizon pulsing softly like the inside of a lung. Marcus stepped forward once, twice. The floor groaned. The whisper said his name again, tender as a lullaby, and when he exhaled, the breath came out as snow. The last thing he saw before the world went white was Lucy standing on the far side of the drift, smiling. Holding out her hand, he took it. Marcus could not remember crossing the threshold, yet somehow he found himself outside, boots sinking into the powder that had risen overnight to his knees. The sky, a dull mirror without horizon, light coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The storm had stopped speaking, but its silence carried the weight of listening. Every movement he made felt watched, echoed by some patient thing just below the crust of ice. He walked toward the lake because there was nowhere else to go. The cabins behind him had lost their color, reduced to pale lumps beneath the drifts. His breath formed ribbons that lingered too long in the air before fading. When he reached the lake, he saw that it no longer looked frozen. Solid beneath the translucent surface rippled faint light, as if dawn had been trapped under glass. He knelt and pressed his glove to the ice. Warm. The realization twisted his stomach. Warmth where there should be death. A low vibration trembled through the ground, spreading into his bones like a second heartbeat. Then a fissure appeared before him, delicate as a scratch at first, widening with a soft sigh. The ice opened like a mouth, exhaling steam scented faintly of iron and something sweet. He leaned closer, drawn by the heat, by the promise of Lucy's voice whispering his name with a tenderness that made reason dissolve. The hole widened just enough for him to slip through. Snow shifted around him, folding like fabric. And suddenly he was falling, weightless, into blue light. The descent felt endless, yet when he landed it was gentle, like settling into deep water. He stood on a surface that shimmered between ice and mist. Around him stretched what looked like the village, but inverted, built of frost and dim luminescence. Roofs hung downward from the unseen ceiling. Chimneys released trails of glowing vapor that drifted upward into darkness. Figures moved through the haze, people shaped from snow and memory, their faces blurred yet unmistakable. He recognized the mayor, the missing men, and among them Lucy, her hair drifting weightless, eyes filled with calm acceptance. "You came," she said, voice echoing inside his skull rather than through the air. Marcus tried to speak, but the words emerged as clouds of frost. She reached for him. Her hand felt neither warm nor cold, only heavy with longing. "It's not death," she whispered. "It's rest. The storm keeps us." Behind her, the others nodded, smiling like believers. Marcus stepped back, shaking his head. "This isn't you," he managed. "You're gone." The ground responded with a groan, and suddenly the entire cavern pulsed, snow and light, rising and falling as though the mountain breathed. Lucy's smile faltered. "You can't stay above forever. It won't let you." Her form flickered, dissolving into mist that scattered toward the unseen roof. From the far edge of the chamber came a rustling, the sound of countless small things moving in unison. Shapes crawled into view, humanoid but wrong. Bodies formed of compacted snow streaked with veins of dark water. Faces smooth except for the places where ice had melted to reveal hollow sockets. Their voices combined into a whisper so vast it became a wind. "Join." Marcus turned and ran. The terrain shifted beneath his feet. Solid one moment, liquid the next. He glimpsed what lay beneath the surface. Layers upon layers of frozen people, mouths open in eternal breath, eyes glinting with trapped light. He stumbled, hands scraping across translucent ground, and through it saw his own reflection staring back from one of the bodies below. Panic surged through him. Somewhere ahead flickered a dim red glow, the flare he had dropped days before. He sprinted toward it, clutching the tiny spark as if it were salvation. The whisper grew harsher, angry now, the warmth of false comfort turning to command. The snow forms closed in, their outlines melting into tendrils that reached for him. He hurled the flare into the largest of them. Light exploded, searing through the blue haze. The creature shrieked without sound, body fracturing into a storm of powder that reassembled instantly. Marcus realized light only delayed them. It could not kill what had no life. He stumbled upon a staircase of ice leading upward toward a faint circle of daylight. Hope flared. He climbed, lungs burning, boots slipping on slick steps. Hands brushed his legs, voices pleaded, "Don't leave us again." He ignored them, climbed faster. At the top, he slammed into solid ice, a ceiling inches thick. Daylight distorted above it. He beat his fists against it until blood streaked the surface, screaming for release. For a moment he saw a movement above, a figure kneeling, looking down. It was himself. The realization froze him more completely than the cold. The reflection mimicked his every motion except one. When he raised his bleeding hand, the reflection smiled. Cracks spiderwebbed through the ceiling. The light dimmed. The whisper swelled, furious and triumphant. Ice gave way and Marcus was thrown upward, bursting through the lake surface in a rush of water and shards. He crawled onto the bank, coughing, gasping the sharp air of the world above. The sun hung low, pale and distant. Around him the village was gone. No cabins, no fountain. Only endless white plain stretching to the horizon. He staggered to his feet, calling names, but the snow absorbed every sound. When he turned, the hole through which he had emerged was already closing, the ice knitting itself seamlessly. In its reflection, he saw the faint silhouettes of those below. Lucy among them, mouths forming words he could not hear. He dropped to his knees, whispering apologies until his voice broke. The wind answered in a tone eerily like laughter. He walked south, guided by compass though the needle spun aimlessly. Hours, maybe days passed. Hunger faded, thirst too, until only the whisper kept him moving. He saw lights in the distance, rescue, he thought, but as he approached he realized they burned too steady, too blue. They formed lines, streets, windows. A tower, another village, identical to Frost Hollow but built entirely of ice. He entered the main street. Every house glowed faintly from within. Through the translucent walls he saw frozen figures seated at tables, raising glasses in silent toasts. He found a door slightly ajar and stepped inside. The air was warm again, humming with that same subterranean heartbeat. On the table lay his logbook, open to a page he had not written. The wind plays tricks when you're tired. His own handwriting. A noise came from the corner. Lucy stood there unchanged, smiling softly. "You made it home," she said. He reached out, touching her cheek. It was real, alive. "Am I dead?" he asked. "Does it matter?" she replied. Outside, snow began to fall inside the crystal houses, thick and silent. Marcus looked through the window and saw the horizon folding inward, a curtain of white rolling toward them. He realized the storm wasn't weather, it was a living thing, an organism feeding on memory, trapping every soul that listened long enough to believe. "We can stop it," he said suddenly, voice fierce. "If I end myself here, it loses me." Lucy shook her head. "You already gave yourself when you heard your name," the whisper answered her words, rising in triumph. The walls turned fluid. The ceiling dripped luminescent frost. He felt the air thicken, pressing him down. He grabbed Lucy's shoulders, shouting her name, but she only smiled, repeating, "It's warm down here." The last thing he saw before everything went white again was the world outside the window, collapsing inward, the storm closing its hand around the hollow that had once been Frost Hollow. When the light returned, it was not sunlight but the sterile flicker of halogen lamps above a white hospital bed. Marcus woke gasping, lungs aching as though filled with frost. Machines beeped softly beside him. A woman in a parka with the crest of the Alaska State Rescue Service stood at his bedside. "You're lucky we found you," she said. "Storm cleared 2 days ago. Whole town's gone. Not a single structure left." Her words slid through him like smoke. He tried to speak Lucy's name, but the sound died halfway. His throat burned, and from somewhere inside the oxygen mask came a faint hiss that almost formed a whisper. She frowned, checking the monitors, unaware. When he slept that night, he dreamed of snow piling against the hospital windows, whispering in rhythm with the ventilator. By morning, the nurse found his bed empty. The window open, though the snow outside was undisturbed. Only a single set of wet footprints led from the door to the center of the floor and stopped. Authorities later listed him as missing, presumed dead. Weeks passed. The rescue worker who had spoken with him returned to the site of Frost Hollow for routine mapping. Satellite images showed nothing but white plain, yet when she stood there, the wind carried a murmur, a voice, repeating something she could almost understand. She followed the sound across the lake until she saw a faint shimmer below the surface. A figure moving slowly, waving as if to greet her. It was Marcus, or someone wearing his face, lips shaping her name. She staggered back. The ice cracked, a narrow hole opening at her feet. Warm air rose through it, smelling faintly sweet. She crouched, mesmerized, until another hand, cold, small, human, reached up and brushed her wrist. The voice below said gently, "It's warmer than you think." When she pulled away, the hole sealed itself as if it had never been there. That night, she recorded her report inside the ranger cabin. On playback, her voice trembled beneath a low hum. A second tone layered under the words, repeating in cadence with her speech. Spectrogram analysis later showed the hidden layer formed a phrase, "We are still here." Winter returned earlier than expected that year. The storm systems over northern Alaska merged into what meteorologists called an unbroken polar engine, continuous cyclone circling the mountains near the vanished valley. Flights diverted, satellites lost signal. Pilots who strayed close reported hearing static filled with human whispers. A research team sent to measure barometric pressure transmitted one final message before contact failed. Surface temperature rising under the snow. Now travelers who drive the northern highways at night tell the same story. They see a faint glow beyond the ridges like a town lit from below. Radios fill with soft static repeating their names. Sometimes through the drifting white, they glimpse a figure standing on the road, a man in a sheriff's coat, frost glittering on his beard, raising a hand as if warning them back. Those who stop and look too long never arrive at their destination. Their vehicles are found idling beside empty roads, heaters running, windshields coated in frost from the inside. Locals call the area the White Mile, a place the map refuses to hold. And when the wind dies, when the world goes perfectly still for one impossible heartbeat, some swear they can hear voices beneath the frozen ground, breathing together, whispering through the miles of buried air. We are warm. We are waiting. Listen.